I'll take 2 more.
Fill her up, Mac.
You have to ask for pity.
Get out of my way. Long road, eh, buddy?
Yeah, how about a lift?
Catch your next freight train, hobo.
Thanks for the lift.
Thank you, Mr. Dillinger.
Don't thank me, it ain't mine. Hello.
John Dillinger?
Copeland.
I got your message. What do you want?
Harry Pierpoint said you might want to be going to work.
I might. Depends on what you got going.
Let that girl go, boy. Watch your shot.
Hey, Lane. Harry Pierpoint helped me inside. I owe him. I'm gonna get him out.
Big talk.
It's all wired. All we have to do is get him guns inside.
And a few lousy grand ain't gonna cut it. Pierpont wants guns inside. We gotta come up with a lot of money.
You're talking.
Real money means banks. You were supposed to bring me Parker and Shaw.
They're losers.
They could drive.
Any idiot can drive.
So what are you telling me?
You and me, Copeland. You and me.
I love Stryper. They're great. I think it's great what they're doing for the kids. It's nice to see a heavy metal act come through that's Christian metal.
It's nice to have a band that represents something, a metal band that represents something beyond your basic thrashcore, evil, wordless garbage.
Stryper's awesome! Yeah, they're awesome, man!
Guitars with loud music, that makes it bad. If you listen to the lyrics, it's all about Jesus.
I think they don't have an open enough
Fully investigated.
Kim struggled with the killer or killers. Her blood was mixed with that DNA and deposited on Bradley. We know Dave Kim did not commit these murders.
A second trial will be a replay of
contributing members like you.
Viewer supported statewide. Vermont Public Television.
I'm Rob Mahalik with an update on Vermont Public Television's progress into the digital future. Like all television stations across North America, VPT is going digital. Our Windsor digital channel has been on air for 2 years, and now with a new Rutland area antenna and transmitter installed, we've launched our Rutland digital channel. It serves Rutland and Addison counties, parts of Bennington and Windsor counties, as well as neighboring areas of New York State. With the right equipment at home, you can watch beautiful high-definition programs from PBS over the air right now on our digital channels. Going digital means Vermont will continue to have its own statewide public television network with all the PBS programs and local programs we treasure. Work began this summer on a major project to co-locate and consolidate all the Burlington Market digital TV channels on Mount Mansfield, and we hope to launch our St. Johnsbury and Burlington digital channels next year. As we continue our conversion to digital, we'll continue to broadcast on our familiar analog channels for several years. For more information, go to our website at www.vpt.org or call 1-800-639-7811.
We are in the very midst of revolution.
It is not in the still calm of life that great characters are formed.
My dear, I cannot live without you.
How ardently I long for your return.
The dramatic story of a founding father and his extraordinary wife. The original power couple, John and Abigail Adams, on American Experience.
Join us Monday evening at 9 on VPT.
Local broadcast of The War That Made America on Vermont Public Television is funded in part by Chittenden. For over 100 years, the people at Chittenden have delivered a range of financial services. Like you, the people at Chittenden don't mind working to find solutions. By Conan Custom Brass, working wonders with metal and light on Pine Street in Burlington, Vermont for over a quarter century, offering new and vintage lighting and classic home accessories. Information on the web. This program is also supported by contributing members like you.
Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
This program is made possible by Richard King Mellon Foundation, the Heinz Endowments, Eden Hall Foundation, National Endowment for the Humanities, and the following.
Gentlemen, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another,
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights,
that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.
and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And for the support of this declaration,
It's one of the great ironies of American history. The man who led the revolution nearly lost his life fighting for that same British Empire 20 years before.
and our sacred honor.
On the eve of battle, George Washington couldn't help but recollect that earlier war.
I did not let the anniversary of this month pass without a grateful remembrance of the escape we had at the meadows. And on the banks of the Monongahela.
That was the war that made him the leader he was. The French and Indian War. But the day it all began, there was nothing heroic about the father of his country. To be fair, Washington is only 22. Ambitious and a little naive, he doesn't realize he's about to become a pawn in a chess game he doesn't understand. They are here. Washington's orders are to drive the French from this contested part of the frontier, with force if necessary. He doesn't know these French soldiers are on a diplomatic mission. The eager young major doesn't take the time to find out what the French are after. Fire! It's George Washington's first taste of that. And he likes it. They can, truth assured, that I heard the bullets whistle. Believe me, there was something charming in the sound. Their retreat cut off by Washington's Indian allies, the French surrendered within minutes. Their officer sits wounded.
This is Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers de Jumonville. He's an envoy. It's a letter from his commander.
I do not speak French. Under the protocol of the day, Washington is responsible for the well-being of the wounded Frenchman. But he soon realizes that this deep in the woods, different rules apply. It turns out this Indian leader, known as the Half-King, has his own agenda. Within minutes, the Half-King's warriors plunder the French camp, scalping the dead and wounded before they leave. The massacre is not an outcome Washington expected, nor could he have foreseen the consequences. This incident will trigger an all-out war for North America that soon spreads around the world. We call it the French and Indian War. This is the story of a war that helped create a new nation no one could ever have predicted. This is the story of the war that made America. To understand how young George Washington could set such momentous events in motion, we have to go back in time, before he blundered into battle, and see how the stage had already been set for war. Spring 1752, 2 years before George Washington's battle in the woods. Speculators from Washington's native Virginia are coming to Pennsylvania to negotiate with the region's Indians for land. They're after a foothold in one of the most contested regions of North America. In the 1750s, Britain holds the East Coast, while Canada and the Mississippi Valley are dominated by the French. Between those two empires lies a giant prize called the Ohio Country, a region the size of France that is largely empty and up for grabs. Both France and Britain set their sights on one spot in particular: a strategic river junction called the Forks of the Ohio, where Pittsburgh stands today. But the Forks of the Ohio isn't theirs for the taking. The native people consider this their land and not something that can be traded or sold. But there is one Indian leader in the region who is willing to talk. The half-king. The same man who will play such an important role in George Washington's life 2 years later.
Don't ever forget that any sign of friendship that we make to the English will not escape the French.
But the French seem weak. While the English traders give us goods and our hunters bring the skins.
In native tradition, women elders provide counsel for important decisions. For the half-king, the stakes in this upcoming negotiation couldn't be higher. Most of the region's Indians prefer the French, but if the British offer him generous trade goods to distribute among his people, an alliance with Britain could put him in a position of power. It's a dangerous gamble, but the half-king has few options. His people are refugees who have been driven out of their homelands in the East by tribal wars and European settlers. Diseases have devastated their numbers. Now 3,000 of them have made the Ohio Country their new homeland. They guard it jealously. But with the French encroaching from the north and the English from the east, the half-king knows he must make some kind of accommodation.
Why are they firing?
Nothing to fear. It's their way of welcome. It's when they fire their guns at the end of the parley that you need to worry.
Parleys between Indians and whites are a fact of frontier life. And the rules are well established. Trade goods grease the wheels. The Virginians have brought a small fortune. The items are more than just gifts. Native people rely on European goods for their survival. Providing a steady supply of these necessities will go far toward securing Indian allies. And then there is wampum, crucial to any parley. Intricately woven belts and strings, encoded with messages of war, peace, and friendship. Until there is a ceremonial passing of the wampum, no negotiation would be complete. When it came to winning favor with the Ohio Valley Indians, the British had some catching up to do. Years of land swindles had left native peoples suspicious of British motives. The French, on the other hand, had traded with the Indian nations and fought beside Indian warriors for more than a century. So for the visiting Virginians, this parley was more than just closing a land deal. It was about winning these people over. The half-king is playing a delicate diplomatic game between the British and the French. And to make it more complicated, he's not altogether his own master in this negotiation. The half-king and his people are one of many Indian groups, and they are far from the most powerful. The dominant force in the Northeast is the Iroquois League, a coalition of 6 nations spread across northern New York. The Iroquois claim sovereignty over the Ohio country and all the Indians who lived there. Technically, they haven't authorized the half-king to make an agreement with the British. So if he goes ahead and does it anyway, he'll be asserting his independence from the Iroquois League. In fact, he's called the half-king because of his limited authority. But if he can strike a good deal with the British at this parley, it could make him a leader to be reckoned with.
Brethren, be assured that the King, our father, in purchasing your lands, had never any...
Why is it taking so long?
He is not...
The way it is with the Indians, there will be much talk and even more giving of gifts before the meat of the matter is addressed.
Kindly accept this belt as a symbol of our two peoples living together as one.
The talking goes on for more than a week. Finally, the half-king agrees to let the Virginians build a small trading post at the forks. With the 2 European empires encroaching on the Ohio country, the half-king has chosen what seems the best of 2 bad options.
The French claim all the land on one side of the river, and the English claim everything on the other. If that be the case, I ask, where does the Indian land lie? We live in a country between, and therefore the land belongs to neither one nor to the other. But the great being above allowed it to be a place of residence for us.
Philip, how do we say farewell?
Ni wapete halefilapwa.
Ni hapete halefshilepwa.
So the Virginians leave the parley, having secured the half-king's support.
He will back the English over the French, and he will allow the Virginians to return the following year to build their post at the forks of the Ohio River. The full effects of the Half-King's decision won't be felt for years to come. And one thing is certain: the French are not about to give up the forks without a fight. One look at the map shows why. The French already control Canada and the Great Lakes region. By building a string of outposts through the Ohio country, they could link their French forts in Canada with their Louisiana colony and keep the British bottled up on the East Coast. A memorandum by the Marquis de la Galissonière, governor of New France, urges action. If the rapid progress of the English colonies be not arrested, they will possess in a short time formidable armaments on the continent of America. And if that happens, warns the Marquis, then all the other French colonies will fall to the British as well. La Galissonière was a visionary. He saw that the struggle for North America had global implications. If the French lost, France would be weakened in Europe as well. For Britain, the stakes were just as high. If it allowed France to dominate the Ohio country, the British colonies could never expand westward. So British authorities send an expedition to order the French to withdraw from the Ohio country. The man they picked to lead it? None other than the 21-year-old Virginian, George Washington. Washington is a natural choice. Brimming with ambition, imposingly tall, he is well connected and eager to make a name for himself. Washington draws his own map of the journey that will take him past the forks of the Ohio to Fort Le Boeuf near Lake Erie, a 500-mile journey that gets underway just as winter sets in. Along the route, Washington comes to a French base. The officer in charge gives a warm welcome to the young Virginian. But the French make it very clear they won't give in to his ultimatum.
That night, he invited us to sup with them. Soon, the wine, which they dosed themselves with freely, loosened their tongues.
With utmost charm, the officer lets him know the sentiment among the French in the region.
They told us that it was their absolute design to take possession of the Ohio, and by God, they would do it. For, though the English could raise 2 men to their 1, they knew our actions were too slow to prevent any undertaking of theirs.
Brushed off by the French, Washington starts back to Virginia in December 1753. His report on the mission goes all the way to London, where King George's
most renowned explorers, Sir John Franklin, and 133 officers and crew set off to conquer the most perilous waterway in the world. Their mission? To be the first to sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific through Canada's icy Northwest Passage.
It felt as if it was the domain of death, the far limit of what human beings could do.
This was the holy grail of Arctic exploration, and it should have been the British Navy's ultimate achievement. But instead, 2 great ships with the best 19th century technology headed into the polar ice and seemed to vanish. For 150 years,
The reason for the loss of the Franklin expedition remained a mystery. Now, a team of investigators has uncovered an extraordinary trail of clues that raises troubling new questions. Could it be that the men actually survived the ice, only to turn on each other?
I think this evidence is strongly suggestive of cannibalism among these Franklin crew members.
What was it that wiped out one of the most technologically advanced expeditions in 300 years of polar exploration? The story of the Franklin expedition can finally be told. Arctic Passage, Prisoners of the Ice, right now on Nova.
What would you ask an oil company?
What is being done to make us less reliant on oil? That's a question. If we're going to keep our dependency on oil primarily for the coming years, the initial future years, where's it coming from?
Google is proud to support Nova in the search for knowledge. Google.
Major funding for Nova is provided by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, serving society through biomedical research and science education, HHMI.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Spring morning in 1845. At the offices of the British Admiralty, Sir John Franklin, a seasoned naval captain, receives final orders before setting off on a daring voyage of exploration.
Now, Sir John, this is the plan.
His destination, the Northwest Passage, one of the last unexplored waterways in the world, and perhaps the most perilous.
And then attempt to turn south or southwest into these uncharted waters. We have every faith in you, Sir John.
At this time, the only way to reach Asia is to make an arduous journey around Cape Horn, a trip that can take 6 months. The British believe that there is a shortcut, a passage through northern Canada that may shave months off the trip. But after 300 years of trying to penetrate the Arctic ice, no ship has ever sailed all the way through.
It's a puzzle, it's a matrix, like a maze. The winds are blowing the ice around, the currents are pushing the ice. And for a ship to traverse that was next to impossible.
This expedition will be the 19th attempt by the British Navy to punch through the passage. And this time, they're pulling out all the stops. John Franklin is one of Britain's most experienced Arctic explorers. At age 59, he may be too old for such a voyage, but finding the passage has been his lifelong dream, and his wife, Lady Jane Franklin, has given him her blessing.
South-southwest 30 degrees, please.
He and his second, Francis Crozier, another veteran explorer, will lead the largest and most technologically advanced Arctic expedition ever mounted. 134 men on board the Terror and the Erebus, a pair of modified warships. Already among the sturdiest in the fleet, each has been radically altered for duty in the Arctic. Shipwrights reinforced their superstructures and added iron plates to the bow. They installed a locomotive steam engine, turning a screw-shaped propeller, a new invention that will allow the ships to power through the ice as never before.
You can sense the extraordinary confidence of people who'd pushed back the frontiers of nature through the glories of the Industrial Revolution, this might that they suddenly had at their disposal. And so they built up this force in two great ships reinforced by steel, and this would be their fortress.
Also on board, a new technology designed to eliminate the hunger and sickness that often plagued long voyages. A 19th century invention that promised to feed the men as if they were back in London. Canned food.
We will never starve again. It will nourish us through winter, spring, and summer.
On an earlier Arctic expedition, Franklin and his crew had to hunt and scavenge for nourishment.
Sir John, do tell us.
8 of them died of starvation, and he himself barely survived.
1819. We scraped lichen off rocks and boiled it up with scrag ends and bits of bones. Arctic pottage.
The story of his brush with death earned him a wry nickname, the man who ate his boots. But this time out, he intended to keep his shoe leather on his feet. So they loaded the ships with more than 30,000 pounds of fresh meat and vegetables, preserved in cans. This would be the first expedition to rely so completely on this revolutionary food source. Each night, Franklin and his officers could look forward to a proper meal, served at his well-appointed captain's table. And for the men, solid food and plenty of diversions, including an organ and a library of more than 1,000 books.
The great quantity of material may have seemed frivolous, but it was really a matter of survival. If you didn't give the men something to do, if you didn't keep them occupied, there was just no way they were going to survive the rigors of an extended Arctic voyage.
The 2 ships set sail from London in May of 1845. According to reports filed by Franklin in July, both ships made an uneventful crossing and docked in Greenland to take on additional supplies. From there, 5 men returned to England, and others posted letters home. A young lieutenant, James Fitzjames, wrote to his brother's family praising Franklin.
You have no idea how happy we all feel. We are very fond of Sir John. He is anything but nervous and fidgety. He is full of life and energy and kindness. We will toast his health when we reach the other side. Everyone believes we will make it through in a season, though I hope that we are forced to stay at least 1 winter in the ice.
On July 28, 1845, the expedition passed a British whaling ship as they headed into the passage. The captain of that vessel reported that Franklin's men were in high spirits, confident that they were about to make history. In the end, the expedition would be remembered, not for its discoveries, but for the disaster it would become when the ship sailed into the polar ice, never to return. When the first winter passed with no word from the men, the Admiralty was not worried. But when the second winter passed, Lady Jane Franklin began to urge the Royal Navy to send a search party.
Now, if an expedition were to leave this spring...
Franklin's superiors dismissed her concerns believing that the men could survive for at least 3 years in the ice. But as the third winter approached, the Navy's confidence began to waver, and in 1848, the first of many search parties left England for the passage. The Royal Navy also offered the staggering sum of £20,000 for the rescue of the crew. By now, the apparent failure of the expedition was the talk of London, and it shocked Victorian England to the core. In 3 centuries of polar exploration, no expedition of this size had ever been lost. More than any other, this attempt should have succeeded. The men had every advantage. What could have happened? Were the ships crushed by the ice? Was the crew struck down by some disease? The Royal Navy even feared that the men might have been attacked by the Inuit, whom they viewed as savages. For 150 years, the cause of the disaster remained a mystery. But a century-old collection of artifacts, historical weather reports, and even forensic evidence are providing new clues.
It's amazing that we can tell this story at all. It's so fragmentary, the evidence so scattered. It's taken a tremendous amount of work, different people working in different disciplines to piece this puzzle together. And as we have done so, as the picture of what really happened has begun to emerge, we've realized what they couldn't. And that's that they were basically doomed from the start.
The first hint that the Franklin expedition carried the seeds of its own destruction was a discovery made in 1850 on Beechey Island, a rocky little outcropping just 300 miles into the passage. Today, there's a tiny Inuit community called Resolute nearby. But in Franklin's day, the area was an uninhabited wasteland. For historian Russell Potter, Beechey Island remains a vital link to the past and still holds important clues.
Ever since I first heard the Franklin story and just grasped the sense of the tragedy there, Beechey Island has been the magnet for me. The one place where you could stand and know that you were standing in Franklin's footsteps.
Today, he's making the long and difficult trip to the place where the abandoned remains of a campsite once stood.
They found signs that tents had been erected, a place where a smithy or anvil had been set up, even some attempt to build a garden up on the shingle.
As the first winter approached and the sea turned to ice, Franklin apparently anchored his ships at Beechey Island. The men then spread out onto the land, where they spent at least 7 months waiting for the summer thaw. Some of the telling items found at Beechey include hundreds of empty food cans, a chronometer, a pair of snow knives, and a pair of gloves, left out as if to dry in the sun. But searchers also found something disturbing. A row of graves belonging to 3 men who were members of Franklin's crew.
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways.
Sitting here with these graves, we know they were here. Just a very, very haunting and haunted place.
The original headstones, which have since been replaced, did not note the cause of death. But the most common killer on long voyages was scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. However, the expedition carried 9,300 pounds of lemon juice to ward off the disease, leaving historians to wonder if some new killer was at work. Something that could have caused the loss not only of these 3 men, but of the entire expedition.
At Beechey Island, you have the remains of 3 members of the expedition, and almost certainly preserved remains, so that this opens the possibility of understanding the medical reasons behind the disaster.
No modern investigator examined the graves until 1984, when the Canadian government gave permission to a team of forensic scientists to exhume the bodies. The scientists hoped that the corpses would be well preserved by the ice, but nothing prepared them for what they uncovered.
It was such a profoundly moving experience, and also one of shock, really, or amazement that these sailors from the last century, there they were. You could see their eyelashes, you could see their eye color, you even get a sense almost of the personality of these characters. It's as if they had stepped forward in time to sort of answer very important questions that needed to be asked.
At the gravesite, the forensic team performed autopsies and discovered that the men had died of tuberculosis. It was a common and deadly disease of the day, but not virulent enough to wipe out the entire crew. To Franklin, the loss of these young men may have been upsetting, but not necessarily alarming. For a group of this size traveling through such harsh conditions, cut off from civilization, some loss of life was nearly inevitable. If anything, the large number of empty food cans found at the campsite suggested that most of the men were surviving and had made it safely through that first winter. But searchers were puzzled by the number of usable items left behind. It suggested that the men had departed suddenly. What could have caused them to abandon the camp in a hurry? Perhaps they had no choice.
If there's any explanation of why Franklin had to take off so quickly without leaving any notes behind, the ice was maybe blown tight against Beechy Island, and he was waiting and waiting. And then, all of a sudden, the winds turned around, and the ice moved off to the south. If he saw that one opening, he'd want to grab it right away. That was his escape.
The ice would have been their main worry. So the minute he had the opportunity, Franklin would have hoisted anchor and headed deeper into the passage. And that's where later expeditions made a series of troubling discoveries. Evidence that Franklin and his men had become stuck once more in the ice. John Graves has a unique window on the Franklin mystery. He oversees a collection of Franklin artifacts recovered from the Arctic, now preserved at the National Maritime Museum in London. This mysterious trail of personal effects once lay scattered over hundreds of miles of ice and snow, and were recovered throughout the 1850s.
It was this succession of search expeditions that went out to the Arctic looking for Franklin and his crew. Little by little, they started to bring back some of the artifacts you see here. And basically, it's all we have really to try and piece together what happened to Franklin and his men.
The first group of items in the collection were discovered by Dr. John Ray in 1854. He was a Scottish explorer on a surveying mission. Traveling overland, he encountered a group of Inuit who had in their possession several small objects that Ray realized must have belonged to the missing expedition.
They include these two pieces from a telescope, a small wooden container, this brass match case, a pocket knife with a bone handle, and this small leather working tool.
This wasn't cast-off garbage like most of the debris found at Beechy Island. These were personal items that Franklin's men would not have discarded willingly.
These items recovered from the Inuit was the first hint that something terrible had happened to the Franklin expedition.
The Inuit told Ray that they had seen ships trapped in the ice and white men on foot walking south. But Ray couldn't figure out where they'd seen the men. They had no maps, and their directions seemed vague. But that wasn't the worst of it. The Inuit also told Ray that some of the men had turned to what they called the last resource: cannibalism. In Britain, the report was not well received.
The Admiralty frankly refused to believe the Inuit testimony. It was thinking the unthinkable, basically. And so subsequent search expeditions were dispatched to try and uncover the truth.
By the time of Ray's discovery, almost 10 years had passed since Franklin left England. The Admiralty had privately concluded that there was no hope of ever finding survivors. But Lady Jane Franklin remained determined, and she financed search parties of her own. Then, in 1858, Leopold McClintock, one of the men she hired to search for her husband, landed on King William Island, where he and his men made two important discoveries. The first, an abandoned boat. The boat had been mounted on a sled and was rigged with harnesses for pulling by the men. It was loaded with equipment and personal effects, and a pair of skeletons. The second find lay 20 miles farther up the coast of the island, a written note, protected by a metal can, and placed inside a carefully constructed pile of stones, called a cairn. A single page that gave haunting testimony as to the fate of the men.
It began with the standard Admiralty form and the message, "All well, Sir John Franklin commanding."
It was dated May of 1847, and it noted that the ships had been stuck in the ice since September of 1846. The current position was given as 70 degrees north, 98 degrees west. The northern tip of King William Island. Apparently, this is where the expedition had ground to a halt. Franklin had probably sailed west from Beachy for about 75 miles before turning south into a channel called Peel Sound, which led to King William Island. For Franklin, these were uncharted waters, but he and the Royal Navy believed that this route to the south was the key to the passage. Peel Sound opens into a network of channels that eventually leads all the way to the Bering Strait and the Pacific Ocean.
To Franklin, that would have been a very, very tempting route to take, particularly if it was open, free of ice. And Peel Sound, we know today, is very, very changeable from year to year. One year it can be completely wide open, another year it can be choked up with ice so that it's impassable even by modern ships.
What Franklin didn't know is that polar ice funnels down from the north through what is now called McClintock Channel, eventually piling up at the southern end of Peel Sound. Franklin couldn't see that icy impasse when he turned south, but once he ran into it, he may have been unable to escape.
At the bottom end, at the south end of Peel Sound, is where he runs into that huge stream of Arctic Ocean polar ice that is probably where he met his demise.
At the south end of Peel Sound, the ice may simply have outflanked the Erebus and the Terror. At least that's what an addition to the note found on King William Island indicated.
Around that message in the margins was written a second, far more disturbing message.
Dated 1848, more than a year after the original note was written. Francis Crozier, the captain of the Terror, added in the margin that the ships were still trapped in the ice, in the same location. They hadn't moved in nearly 2 years. What had gone wrong? Usually the polar ice melts during the summer. Could it be that this time the ice simply didn't melt?
The nightmare scenario is that I'm never going to get out of this ice. I'm facing another long winter. It's going to get dark. It's going to get very cold. And here I am out on the ice that's still moving around. I don't know where this ice is carrying me.
No previous polar expedition had ever reported a summer so cold that the ice didn't break up. That anomaly puzzled polar scientist Roy Kerner. Recently, he set out to learn just what kind of weather Franklin had to contend with during that fateful year. Kerner and his team regularly drilled down into the Arctic ice cap, retrieving samples that they can use to understand temperature patterns from other eras. At most latitudes, ice is impermanent. But north of the Arctic Circle, it tends to hang around, even for thousands of years. Kerner retrieved a sample from more than 100 meters below the surface. By counting ice layers and by analyzing the chemical content of the core, he zeroed in on a section that he could date back to the late 1840s. He hoped it might be able to tell him more about the conditions that Franklin's men faced.
The reason ice cores give the history of the climate in the past is that everything that happens on the surface is preserved as the ice gets buried. If the surface of the snow melts, the water percolates down and it forms these ice layers. The more it melts, the more ice layers, and the thicker the ice layers.
Kerner found that within the 1840s ice core, there was simply no sign of the transparent ice layers that form when snow melts. Kerner had once before seen another ice core like this, dated from the early 1970s. In that case, he had actual weather reports to compare it to, and he learned that the ice from the 70s had formed during a very cold period of almost permanent winter.
The point to make on this core is the absolute near absence of any signs of melting whatsoever. None of those clear layers at all. Just bubbly ice that is formed from compression of snow that doesn't melt in the summer.
The finding convinced him that Franklin faced similar conditions, when much of the sea ice had not melted at all. For an expedition hoping to sail the passage with 19th century technology, the conditions would have been deadly.
If it's a cold summer, that ice isn't going to go out and open up. The channels are ice infested still. The ships that they used in those days, they don't have the power to get through even modest ice.
Kerner's evidence confirmed that Franklin and his men had encountered freak weather conditions, more severe than previous explorers had reported. Worse than that, Kerner's ice core showed that this period of extreme cold likely lasted for 5 long years. This terrible run of bad luck trapped the men in the wilderness. But there was even worse news. Also written in the margin of the note, another entry read, Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June, 1847. It continued, the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. They were still living on their ships and probably had plenty of food, but a mysterious killer now stalked their ranks.
They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters, these see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. For he commandeth and raiseth the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to the heaven, they go down again to the depths. Their soul melteth away because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man.
It's clear from everything we know he was a beloved commander. He'd been in the Arctic before and only one other officer had.
And he bringeth them out.
I think that his presence
It's a tremendous reassurance to everyone there, and his loss would have been a terrific blow.
So that the waves thereof are still. Then are they glad, because they are quiet.
Sir John Franklin died even before the first search expeditions left England. In that year, Lady Jane continued to write poignant letters to her missing husband, unaware that she was already a widow.
I desire nothing but to cherish the remainder of your days, however injured and broken your health may be. I live in you, my dearest.
Three years after the expedition left England, the commander and 20% of the 128-man crew lay dead. Already it was one of the deadliest disasters in the history of polar exploration. The final entry on the note said that the men had abandoned the safety of their ships and were now walking south. In that brief note, Second-in-Command Francis Crozier testified to a terrible truth. The expedition lay in ruins, and the chances of anyone getting out alive were rapidly fading.
The whole plan for traversing the Northwest Passage depended on being able to sail through it. They didn't have a plan for getting away except by sailing out. They didn't have, for example, lightweight sledges adapted to the terrain. All they had was what was on the ship, that lavish factory full of Victorian contrivances and good ideas.
The boat they'd converted into a sled was filled with the crew's personal possessions. As it was later found by a search party led by Leopold McClintock, it's estimated to have weighed a staggering 1,400 pounds. After 3 years marooned in the Arctic, dying one by one, their overland escape attempt must have been an act of desperation. The nearest outpost lay 600 miles to the south. A daunting distance to travel by foot, especially with so much gear in tow.
This boatload of strange relics of Victorian culture. The Vicar of Wakefield prayer books, New Testament in French, carpet slippers, chocolate, tea, button polishers, buttons, silver plate and utensils, all of the detritus of this, inner culture of the ships that they tried to take with them.
You can imagine these people desperately wanting to carry their precious world with them, that everything they trusted was now going to become not an advantage but a problem, so that they were burdened now by their numbers, they were burdened now by the weight of their stores, and above all burdened by the fact that they didn't know what to do with the land that they were now suddenly totally dependent on.
It would have been murderously difficult to haul such a heavy load through the snow. At some point, they apparently abandoned it on the west coast of King William Island. And it's there that the trail of clues runs out.
Based on this trail of evidence, the Admiralty decided that Franklin's men had simply starved to death trying to walk out of the wilderness. And for more than a century, that was the official narrative. But there were eyewitnesses, as it turns out, people who actually saw Franklin's men in this last extremity, and their story is quite different from the official Admiralty version.
In 1869, an American journalist, Charles Francis Hall, found these eyewitnesses when he spent 5 years in the Canadian